So I think it's a good opportunity to maybe bring this down a little bit, to make it a little more concrete. And I would very much like to welcome my two distinguished participants on stage right now. And we have the great honor of welcoming Ursula Plassnik and Chaoting Cheng. Please come on stage. Please, you here, and yes. So, I don't think I have to introduce Ms. Plassnik very much. She was Austria's foreign minister between 2004 and 2008, is one of the most active and certainly recognized in recent decades. She's a native of Klagenfurt and a jurist, and she looks back on a diplomatic and political career that spans over 4 decades. Before and after her time in government, she was ambassador to Switzerland and Austria's representative at UNESCO. She also served as a member of parliament and as special international envoy for women's affairs of the Austrian Foreign Ministry. She regularly publishes about European topics and is also a member of the magazine European Voices Advisory Council. And I would also like to point out that the people from this magazine, which is a very interesting new publication, have helped us a lot, and also thank them for this, and thanks you for coming. All the way to our right, we would like to welcome Chaoting Cheng. Chaoting Cheng has worked as a manager in various countries, including China, India, Nigeria, and Germany, for a telecommunications giant. From 2016 on, he devoted himself entirely to his research interests and became a PhD student. And he is currently researching China's Belt and Road Initiative at the Freie Universität Berlin, Germany. And he also writes political commentaries regularly for Berliner Zeitung and the Chinese edition of Financial Times. So certainly someone who knows the European and the Chinese perspective very well. Thank you so much for coming to Lech.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Dear participants, I would like to start a little bit with some things that Ivan Krastev says. Always very provocative. He manages to really put things, you know, to make them very acute and say things very shortly. And it's a rather bleak picture that he paints, especially for Europe. A lot of adaptation needed. And one thing that stuck with me is that optimism is only for the holidays, but still we do not have to fatalistically accept that what is coming, that we are defenseless against that. So how do you see this, Ursula Plassnik? Is it really so dire for Europe, the situation now?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Optimism is an attitude. It's not something that's given to one or the other person. So we will have to work for that. And I think that Ivan Krastev also ended on an interesting note, because Europe is going to be in the interesting position of being probably the continent where certain things that have been so familiar and so self-evident will still have value, will still need to be kept, will still keep the Europeans, European citizens interested and active in this project. Because the first thing that we should really strive for is to convince European citizens that it's a worthwhile exercise to integrate Europe, to work for the future, that we can do something about ourselves and about our own future. After all, the uniqueness of the European Union for me is that 27 democracies are writing the script according to which they want to live. And nobody should dictate this. But this also means, on the other hand, that we have to grow up. We have to move out of the comfort zone. And that essentially means changing a mindset, and Ivan talked about that. Now, changing mindsets is always a very delicate issue. It is something that takes a major effort. Are we ready for this major effort, all of us Europeans, or do we prefer to close our eyes to the challenges that lie ahead? They are multifaceted and they are simultaneous. We are really already in these stress tests. how do we face up to this? Let me maybe point out some of the positive issues compared to the other parts of the world. One of them is that we have clarity about the personnel, and compared to other continents, I'm now looking in a transatlantic direction. I would venture to say that our personnel, the key personnel on the European level, is quite professional. We like to make fun of politicians. We also like to make fun of our European politicians. But if you look at their qualifications right now, all of them or most of them have a lot of practical experience. Ursula von der Leyen, like her or not, but she's in her second term. She got a number of issues really right in her first term of office, and she's ready to go, together with a relatively strong commission. Now, as Ivan said, it's not all up to the commission, but if you just can't phone Paris or Berlin for the time being, it might help to call Ursula. So that's a positive thing. We have a budget. We will need more money, that's for sure. So that's going to be one of the big questions of how to finance the tasks we have on the European plate right now. Ursula and her team are going to have to think about that and not only be creative, but be serious and assure the support of European taxpayers. Because without the taxpayers, we can stop all our exercise quite rapidly. And the third thing is we know where our weaknesses are. We know that we are backlagging in terms of economic competition. We know that when it comes to the geotech side, we are also lagging behind economically, and politically we will have to be more united or stay united where we are united. So it's a big program, but we have a number of proposals on the table. They are very practical in nature. We have asked, among others, 3 former Italian prime ministers to give us their ideas on how to move forward, and we have a whole full basket, I would say, of very practical proposals. So that's the positive note. We know where we stand, we know our weaknesses, we know where we have to act. We have to mobilize the political will to do that. And we have to make sure that we start rethinking, and this is where I join Ivan, we have to start rethinking issues, certain issues that will have to be where the old evident issues are no longer a pattern or a suitable precedence for what we will have to do in the future. And I'm in particular thinking about security, regional and global.
Chaoting Cheng, you're from a country that has undergone a tremendous transformation in the last decades, and you're now living on a continent that is probably much more set in its ways. So how do you perceive these discussions that we have here about Europe and about its position in the world?
Yeah, I think now the world is facing challenges. I think the biggest challenge is the US-China strategic competition. And this competition, I mean, the outcome of this competition will determine the fate of mankind and the international order in the 21st century. So in front of this strategic competition between US and China, I'm sure that European countries and European as one continent has a role to play. Right now, I think the medians are talking about China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran axis. Okay, so I think this concern is real. On the other hand, the people are talking about the importance of Europe. I think now for Chinese leader, European Union is very important because China is facing strategic pressure from the United States. Therefore, China will do everything and anything to ensure the support at least neutrality from the European Union. And I think Chinese leaders are intelligent and they have non-tradition of united front. And I think they will take some actions to ensure the support of the European countries.
And can you talk a little bit more about this? I mean, it's clear that China and Europe have a very strong economic ties, that China is an extremely important market for European companies and vice versa, obviously. But does China also see Europe as a security actor? Does it take the EU seriously as a military actor? Or is this primarily an economic role that China sees for Europe?
I don't think China perceives EU as one military power. So in China, the narrative, this kind of narrative is very popular, that Europe is just the little brother of the United States, and the US is the leader of NATO, and EU is not powerful geoeconomically and militarily. But in terms of economic factor, I think China perceives EU very seriously.
And in terms of, there's a lot of discussion now about trade wars. There's tariffs that have already been raised. There's a discussion, a big debate now about e-cars, for example, like electric cars. So is this actually a threat for the Chinese economy, or is this something that they think that is manageable?
Of course, it's a serious challenge for China's economy. Right now, China's position is not very strong, and the Chinese economy has slowed down, and Chinese leaders are facing very serious domestic pressure. If Trump continues his trade war against China, I think this will make China's economy even worse. I don't know how they will respond to this kind of situation, but I'm sure they want to have more cooperation with EU.
So hope that this is a counterweight.
Yes.
What is the attitude, though, I mean, in China after Trump's election? I mean, China knows there's been 4 years of Trump already, right? And now it's another 4 years. Is Trump a partner that China thinks they can manage? Because, I mean, on the one hand, he's, of course, very much about, you know, hedging China, you know, keeping it, controlling China more, of waging a trade war. On the other hand, he's somebody who could also, he sees himself as a deal maker and who doesn't really care about some other topics like human rights, for example, which have often been a conflict. Is it maybe even somebody who China can work more easily with than certain other leaders like Biden?
I think China's leadership has very complex perception toward Trump. Actually, from geopolitical perspective, Trump is really a hard opponent of Chinese leadership. We remember the US government has labeled China as a strategic competitor in 2017 under Trump's leadership. Okay, that's the first time. And I mean, from geopolitical perspective, the Trump 2.0 will be very difficult for Chinese leadership. But you have mentioned about ideology. I think for Chinese leadership, ideology is also a very important matter. For them, from their perspective, Trump is a businessman, and Trump's leadership is a transaction style. Maybe China is in the position to make a deal with Trump, and Trump downplays the importance of ideology. Actually, this is really important for China's leadership, because for China's ruling party, I mean Chinese Communist Party, the most important thing is to stay in power. And they don't like regime change at all. It seems that Trump is not interested in regime change. This is different from Biden administration. Biden has started the movement of kind of democracy against autocracy. Maybe Trump is not interested in this kind of narrative at all. This is good news for China's leadership.
Ursula Plassnik, Mr. Cheng talked about Europe's role in this, also maybe as almost a kind of a counterweight, a mediator that China hopes for. You have also written before that Europe has no interest in joining the United States in a very serious trade war against China. So do you see this as a sort of a mediating role almost, or would that be going too far?
Well, this is something we cannot foresee, to be honest. I think I wouldn't see the developments as categorical as Mr. Cheng, because of course there is a strategic rivalry between the old hegemon and the new hegemon. And after all, it's not so much a question of feeling as a hostage. The United States of America are still very much of an important political and economic hegemon. Their role is being reduced, and this, of course, is a painful development, whereas China is developing with an absolutely breathtaking speed in so many areas. So this kind of constellation will not go away, and it will affect Europe. It does already. From both sides, there's going to be increasing pressure, and Europe will have to stand up to that pressure. That's act number one, to sort of not give in. We've heard the word of the Chinese leadership considering Europe as a kind of little brother to the United States. Maybe we ask the question in Washington and have very much the same answer. This is our little brother or our ex-little brother. Can you divorce from your brother? Not really. We are partners in a complex way, and we are rivals, competitors. We are also rivals and competitors and partners. So we will have to redefine as European Union how we define partnerships. And this will also be a question that plays into the global South area and dimension. Because one thing is sure, the old security architecture as we knew it. I am a child of the Cold War. I'm born in '56, and I was socialized in the Helsinki process. So the world was very fixed then and very frozen in a way. And for the last 30 years, we have seen an enormous amount of changes, not only in the Western Hemisphere or with regard to China, but also if we think about India overtaking China as the most populous single country. We have seen an enormous amount of change, not always to the better in the multilateral system, in the United Nations system, and all those who are cooperating in this effort to provide a minimum of global governance. Because this is what we need. We should not throw it away, and we should not disregard the institutions that prove to be very useful in a number of aspects. And this is where we will also, Europeans, but also Americans, we will want and need to cooperate. There are a number of issues, climate change being one of them. Now you can step out of the Paris Agreement, but that doesn't keep major actors like California from cooperating. So there are limits. This is what I want to say. There are limits to this a bit oversimplified approach. Here are the big guys, and they are going to fight for influence. Yes, they will. They already do. Let's have a look at the issue of economic security, for example. That's going to be one that will be very relevant in the next legislative period.
Meaning certain strategic areas?
It means that the old issues of export controls, dual-use technology has come back. For example, if you look at ASML, the big Dutch leading semiconductor company that, under American pressure, had to stop exporting certain parts of semiconductor technology to China. Look at the other side, economic coercion from the Chinese government on Lithuania, for example, because Lithuania decided to open a Taiwan office. They got the full impact of economic coercion or coercion from the Chinese side. So this is going to maybe increase. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Are there ways to provide it? Europeans will have to work hard on that. they will, I mean, Europeans and the European Union is not averse to deal making. This is very much a political technology that is global. It is not something we favor as Europeans, because our belief is more towards the law, towards rules, a rule-based system, and the protection and the participation capacity that offers to everybody around. We do not want a world, and this is going to stay European, that's part of the European way of life. We do not want an international system where the strong guys fix it among themselves. So we will have to stand up for our own way of life. It is different from the American way of life. It is very different from the Chinese way of life. Maybe this is going to, the pressure which we face and which we are going to face is going to serve as a good wake-up call, as has the invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022.
We'll get to that hopefully a little later, but I would like to have your take. I mean, I think in Europe there's often the perception that in China politics and economics are intertwined, that this can't really be separated. Is this true? Would you say this is right? Or is there a way of keeping good economic relations while political relations are becoming worse or becoming more distant?
I think it's difficult to separate economy from politics. Actually, in the academia world, we have the terminology of economic statecraft or geoeconomy. So actually, in the past, China has used its economic power to pursue its political objectives. I think Belt and Road Initiative is a typical example.
Belt and Road, your topic, of course. Yes.
I think U.S. is doing the same. In the past, U.S. has focused on military means to achieve its political objective, but they have failed. Like the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, U.S. has spent more than $3 trillion US, but they have gained nothing. So now U.S. has realized the importance of economic tools. For example, Trump is always using tariff as a weapon to pursue its political objective. I think China is doing the same, and EU will do the same. So I have read one article from Foreign Affairs magazine. Okay, so the authors have also argued that EU must strengthen its geoeconomic power. And in the so-called Cold War 2.0, I don't think a hot war is very likely. I think all the stakeholders, all the great powers are doing their best to avoid a hot war. But what does it mean, Cold War? This means economic power will be more frequently used to achieve political objective of the great powers.
But I would like to talk about this a little more, because I mean, it does seem like the approaches are different, right? I mean, you have a world order, you have international economic institutions that set certain rules, and of course there's powerful actors that can influence these rules, but the rules apply to everyone. But then you have something like the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Road, where China really creates these small areas, or like big areas. They set logistics chains and things like that, and that is actually politically controlled. So can you talk a bit about, like, the methods are different, right?
You mean the Chinese methods are different?
Yeah, I mean, the way China is projecting political power through economic means, even if everybody does that, but China does it differently than Europe. So can you talk a bit how it's different?
It's really different from US and Europe, because the Chinese political system is different. China is a party state, and the Communist Party is very powerful. It's in the position to control and mobilize all the available resources, military resources, political resources, economic resources, and cultural resources, everything. But US is different. US is a so-called free market economy. U.S. government, the federal government is not as powerful as Chinese government. So I mean, the U.S. federal government, yeah, they are powerful. They have probably the most powerful military forces, but they cannot order the business industry to implement the foreign policy. U.S. cannot do that. EU cannot do that either, but China can do that. So I mean, BRI again is a typical example. China has spent more than $1 trillion in BRI, but for U.S. and EU, they have Global Gateway and they have Global Partnership for Infrastructure. But what's the progress? Progress is not obvious. And where is the money? So I think China has spent a lot of money in BRI, but EU and the US are not doing the same.
Another question, of course, is China is able to mobilize a lot more resources, for example, through subsidies, right, for its companies. Is that something that also is a fundamental difference? Or, I mean, it seems like Europe and especially the US have also caught up with that of providing a lot of subsidies for companies. So is there kind of like a race in subsidies going on now too that you see?
Of course, China has subsidiary, but it's not the main strength of Chinese government. I think the main strength, number one, is that China has a very powerful state-owned enterprise and state-owned banks. And, but in EU and US, you have private banks, private business. This is the first difference. And the second difference is that the cost of Chinese human resource is very low, much lower than the Western countries. And China has also gained capabilities and experience of large-scale infrastructure. I think Western countries have lost such capabilities. China is in the position to build a large-scale infrastructure worldwide, not only financial power, but also human resource and experience. This is really important. So this is China's strength, I think, if you are talking about economic statecraft.
We talked already a little bit about this notion that the world is kind of forming into blocks more and more now with geopolitical tensions. But we also heard that, you know, there's this very strong interconnection. So maybe this notion, going back to the Cold War in many ways, of different blocks is perhaps a little antiquated because the economic situation is different. What are your thoughts about this block building?
Yeah, I would be very careful about the block building because it's in a way the narrative, the Chinese narrative, and to a certain degree the American narrative. I do not think that Europeans have an interest in adopting this narrative. I think the European interest is much more to be aware of systemic rivalry, and this is what we've been talking about, what you have laid out so skillfully. Europe is a continent where you have private business, where you have free people, where citizens have a choice, where you have more than one party, sometimes too many parties, sometimes the costs of democracy seem to be very high. But this is what Europe is very profoundly all about. We've fought hard for that, and it took centuries to build it up. So this is worth defending, and this is worth also promoting and explaining to citizens where the advantage is. Otherwise, we cave into quantity, and this is certainly not how the world is going to be run in the future. At least this is what we hope, because societies are more complex than the Chinese government would wish them to be. They are also more complex than in the Trumpian version of what the deep state is, political institutions are all about. So I would venture to say that the big USP of the European business model is challenged, yes, but the big USP, the unique selling proposition of Europe, is this combination of freedom, of responsibility, of market economy, of awareness of the environmental dimension, of the need to manage skillfully and with a lot of imagination and creativity, climate change, the energy transition, all these subjects have been on the table. They are global issues. We will have to become more smart in picking our partners, because we are also going to face in the world, on the global level, a competition for partners. Who is the more attractive partner? The Belt and Road Initiative is already one of these very practical issues where a lot of advantages stand on one side, but on the other side, a lot of countries who have been engaged here or have been engaged by the Chinese government, like African governments in infrastructural programs, but also on the Asian side, where they start having not only second thoughts, but pulling out of what seemed to be an easy offer, easier than the offers made by the European partners in a way, because Europeans are more challenging and more demanding partners. There's no doubt about that. If you don't have to talk about human rights any longer, if you don't have to talk about values, things become seemingly more easy. But they might also be less sustainable, less durable, and those who do not adhere to the same perception of what a human being is all about and what political unity should be all about, they might find themselves more vulnerable on a number of levels.
Do you share this categoric judgment?
I share some points of view. So just now you have mentioned block building. So block building is bad. Nobody likes block building. Chinese government doesn't like block building either. They always promote globalization, global village, because China has benefited from the globalization. China is probably the biggest beneficiary of the past globalization. But from my point of view, the old globalization is dead. And
it's dead.
It's dead. Yeah, and this is reality. This is against our wish, but we have to admit it's a reality. So the Cold War 2.0 is coming. Now I think the block building is on the way. The so-called global East, okay, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Yeah, they are not the close allies like Western countries, but it's kind of allies. I think in the future, the world will be divided into two blocks, similar to Cold War 1.0. And between EU and the United States, there will be division of the neighbor. And I think the relationship between Europe and China will be very complicated. In the past, the two sides can cooperate on some global matters, like you have mentioned, climate change, and they also have common interest, like economic trade. This is true, but now China is more and more becoming the powerful competitor of EU. Look at the progress of Chinese electrical vehicle, and now I think German car maker industries have huge pressure from Chinese companies. I mean, in the past, the economic relationship is the most important factor for EU-Chinese relationship, but now China is no longer the big market, but also formidable competitor of EU. For ideological dimension, I think EU and China have a fundamental difference. That's why this is the so-called systemic rivalry. But for geopolitical dimension, I think there is also a huge change. In the past, I don't think EU and China have a huge conflict in the field of geopolitics, but now the situation is changing because of Russia-Ukraine war, and now the EU, I mean, European countries are more and more dissatisfied with China's support to Russia. So this means for the geopolitical field, China is facing more and more resistance from European side.
This war in Ukraine, of course, extremely important topic for Europe. How is that seen in China? I mean, so far, China supports Russia, obviously, economically, but not directly in a military fashion at the moment. How does China see itself as an actor in this war, or not really?
Actually, China's attitude toward Russia is very complicated. On the one hand, China is supporting Russia economically, but China's government does not acknowledge that, right? So, but from my personal perspective, at least Chinese attitude toward Russia is very positive. I mean, even for the ordinary people, they really support Russia. But on the other hand, they understand that China's support to Russia is paying price because they need support from European countries. But because of China's support to Russia, I think European countries are pressuring China. So, I mean, the situation is very difficult for China. And the biggest concern of China is that if Russia is defeated, maybe a Putin regime will be overthrown. So this means that China will be facing the US alone. So from strategic perspective, this is very bad. This should be avoided.
So it's like a buffer. Russia is a buffer for China in a way.
Russia is a buffer for China, for China, yes.
What are your thoughts on the war in Ukraine? I mean, Europe's role. You mentioned earlier it was a wake-up call. Where are we now?
Well, we are at a moment where Europe has to make sure to have a seat at the table concerning the future regional security architecture, but also the global security architecture. I would not see China playing a major role in European security, to be honest. But I see developments all around of personalizing the issue of peacemaking. If we can talk in terms of peacemaking, because for the time we are not living a cold war, but we here in Europe are living a hot war. It is extremely hot. It is extremely painful, not only for Ukrainians, but also for the neighbors, because Russian influence, Russian activities to influence what's happening in Europe is growing rather than decreasing. There is no question of defeating Russia or of Russia withdrawing or seeking any way to come to the negotiating table. So, but I think this is going to be one of the major challenges ahead for the Europeans. And the Europeans' Peace Nobel Prize of a couple of years ago have done all kinds of things in favor of Ukraine. And I totally agree with the way we have done it. And I think we need to continue this. We might also need to work even harder, depending on what developments we see in the Trump administration. But we should also not neglect the issue of finding a table, finding a format, finding a process, because negotiating an agreement, any kind of agreement on Ukraine, about Ukraine, will never take place without Ukraine at the table, but also without the other Europeans at the table. All of them. This is not a matter of NATO versus Russia. This is not a bilateral issue. It is profoundly a matter of all European security architecture. Petr Pavel, who's the Czech president, said it very bluntly in an interview. It's not only about Ukraine, but it's also about European security. So the European Union must be at the table, must guarantee this. There are formats, because we have a tendency right now to talk and think in terms of what a possible outcome could be of that act of aggression against Ukraine. And we tend to think about what does Ukraine have to give up, or what concessions could the aggressed country make, which in itself for Europeans is difficult to even frame, because we do not accept that. So the question is going to be not only about anticipating some kind of outcome, but to initiate a process, because leaving it to individual people like Mr. Trump, Mr. Orban, Mr. Zelensky, Mr. Putin, as we tend to see the world right now in a very simplified manner, is not something that is, in my analysis, compliant with our very basic ideas about what security should be all about.
With Trump and Trump's understanding of foreign policy, do you think this could also mean that China has to play a bigger international role, or does China see this as an opportunity also of maybe playing a bigger international role?
Russia-Ukraine war is probably the most important thing for Europeans. So Europeans care about the Russia-Ukraine war and security. This is understandable. But I mean, we cannot see the situation only from European perspective. We have to understand the whole big picture. Okay, so the big picture is that Cold War 2.0, and both sides are mobilizing their resources. So for European people, European countries, I think you have to think about the possibility that U.S. will pivot to Asia. So actually, this is not new. This is a strategy from Obama administration. So I mean, in the future, U.S. Under Trump leadership, they will shift their attention and resource to the so-called Indo-Pacific. And European countries will take more responsibility to support Ukraine, not only economically, but also militarily. But this does not mean U.S. will withdraw from Europe. I think, number one, U.S. will continue to provide a nuclear umbrella to European security. Number two, EU will take more responsibility militarily. And there will be one division of neighbor between EU and the US. I think both sides are trying to mobilize their resource. I think China, Russia, and even North Korea, they are also strengthening their cooperation. And now for the Western countries, the progress is slow, but I think the situation is becoming more and more clear. I don't think Trump is an isolationist. Isolationist rhetoric is just his means to pressure EU to take more responsibility in supporting Ukraine.
Thank you both very much. We're out of time. There's a lot more to discuss, obviously, but thank you very much for coming here. I would also like to point out that Burke Brende, who was supposed to be here, was called on a business trip to Japan on short notice, but we have a pre-recorded talk that we will see later in this media summit. And I want to thank you both for coming, and maybe a warm round of applause for our panelists here.
Thank you.
Thank you.